Hello and welcome to the Eclipsing History Podcast, a podcast where we explore the history of eclipses through the diverse cultures of North America.
This is the bonus episode, Eclipses in the Language of Shakespeare. It is based on Stephanie Gearhart's talk at the Eclipse Speaker Series. You can also find the episodes and additional material at our website, bgsu.edu/eclipsinghistory.
So let's begin by asking what seems to be, I think, a relatively straightforward question, but becomes a little bit more complicated after we scratch the surface. And that is, what did Shakespeare understand by the word eclipse? What did it mean to Shakespeare? So the history of language, I think, is really, really interesting. And I'd like to begin by thinking about the etymology of the word eclipse. What I mean by that in this case is to think a little bit about the origin of the word, about when it was first recorded as having been used in English, and how its meaning has changed over time. So eclipse can be a noun or a verb. As a noun, as early as the 14th century, it meant something very similar to how we might define it today. And that is, this comes from the Oxford English Dictionary, which is a really great resource. And if you're a word nerd like me, this is like the best thing ever. I'm happy to show you how to use it, so how if you want. At any rate, as early as the 14th century, we see eclipse being understood as an interception or obscuration of the light of the sun, the moon, or other luminous body by the intervention of some other body, either between it and the eye, or between the luminous body and that illuminated by it. The first time we see it in print in this sense in English is in 1374, when Geoffrey Chaucer, the father of English literature, used it in his translation of Boethius. Also, as a noun, as early as the 16th century, it meant obscuration, obscurity, dimness, loss of brilliance, or splendor. Perhaps unsurprisingly then, as a verb, eclipse referred to the action of a luminous body being darkened by another body. So, for example, in the later part of the 17th century, John Milton, the poet, describes the night hag when called in secret. Riding through the air, she comes to dance with Lapland witches, while the laboring moon eclipses at their charms. So in this case, the word means to suffer eclipse, to be eclipsed, so the moon is going into darkness. Put another way here, eclipse is to cause an obscuration of some other heavenly body by passing between it and the spectator, or between it and the source from which it derives its light. So the action of the thing we were just talking about. Beginning in the 16th century, we also see eclipse appear as a verb, meaning to cast a shadow upon, to throw into the shade, to obscure, or deprive of luster. In the late 16th century, Roger Goad, a theologian, notes the glory of it was eclipsed, sort of thrown into the shadow. A century later, English writer John Dryden would say, "I confess I was a little eclipsed, but I'll cheer up." And I'd like to start using this in my daily speech. I've been a little eclipsed, but it'll be okay soon. A little bit later in the 17th century, as a verb, eclipse also meant to hide or to screen from or to extinguish light. And this is what Shakespeare means when he has a character called Talbot in the first part of Henry VI say to his child this: "Then here I take my leave of thee, fair son, born to eclipse thy life this afternoon." And I would point out that this is a nice little play on words. He's talking to his male child, his son, but he's also six. I think the word son sounds like S-U-N as well, and he's talking about an eclipse, which is nice. Anyway, that's a lot to take in, but the bottom line here is this. We can think about eclipse as a noun or a verb, as a thing or an action, and we can also think about it in literal or metaphorical terms. So, for example, in Milton's passage that I showed you a minute ago, the moon is involved in an eclipse. Literally, it's getting dark. And we can think about eclipse as metaphorical, as in something is like an eclipse. So in this example from Shakespeare that you're looking at now, death is like an eclipse because it is, we might say, the ultimate darkness. Speaking metaphorically and hyperbolically, with his references grounded in literal heavenly bodies, is in the 17th century one of my favorite poets, John Donne. And if it's helpful to think about this, Shakespeare was born in 1564 and he died in 1616. So you can see Donne is a contemporary. So I'm going to talk about Donne a little bit tonight. He was living and writing at the same time as Shakespeare. In one of Donne's poems called The Sun Rising, he has a great usage of the term eclipse. Here in this poem, the narrator, the speaker, is in bed with his lover and the morning comes and he doesn't want to leave her. How many of you have read Romeo and Juliet? This is a little bit like that moment where Juliet is like, well, please don't get out of bed. Please pretend that it's the nightingale and not the lark, right, that's singing outside. It's sort of that situation. In this case, though, the male narrator is upset with the sun that is intruding into the bedroom and sort of saying, like, it's time to get up. And so he addresses the sun and he says this, "Thy beams so reverent and strong, why shouldst thou think I could eclipse and cloud them with a wing, but that I would not lose her sight so long?" So here the speaker addresses the sun, asking why it should think it is so powerful. Because he has a really clever way of making it disappear, making it no longer the bright, strong signal that his time in bed is over. All he has to do to eclipse or make dark the sun is to, he says, with a wink. And in this period, a wink would have been closing both of your eyes. So he just has to close both his eyes. That'll show the sun. He's not going to tell me to get out of bed. But if you look at that last line that I have up there, you see that there's a little bit of a problem there. See the word but? So I do that. I shut my eyes to block out the sun. But of course, when I do that, I also block out my beloved. So because he wants to keep seeing her and because he wants to stay in bed, he has to attempt a kind of different strategy with the sun. And I'll come back to that in a few minutes. At any rate, this word eclipse for Shakespeare could be a verb. It could be a noun. It could be used literally. It could be used metaphorically. In terms of its origin, if you were here for the earlier eclipse show, you heard this in the presentation. Eclipse derives in part from this Greek word eclipses. And this is a word that means to leave out or to pass over. The prefix ek is out of or away from, and the verb is lepo, it means to leave. And depending on the context, this word eclipses can be quite neutral, as in simply like going out, going away from. It can, though, be more dire, as in forsaking, abandoning, ceasing, or perhaps even dying. And I have to pause to give credit to Dr. Phil Peake in classics, who helped me through this bit of my research, because it was literally all Greek to me, and he really helped me through it. So here it is. The related word, which is now obsolete, is this word, eclipsis. And this word refers to the grammatical figure of omission. And that sounds like a horribly scary and strange thing that I just said, but you may know it as the word we know now, ellipses. Those little dots, you know, when you're quoting something and you leave out a chunk of text and you put those dots. So this word ellipsis comes from eclipses, which is the word Shakespeare would have understood. It means something's missing, something's removed, something's gone. In the 16th century in England, this punctuation was recognized similarly to how we recognize it today. This guy here, in the late part of the 16th century, George Putnam, notes that if one word or some little portion of speech be wanting, that means lacking or missing, it may be supplied by ordinary understanding virtue of the figure. And by the figure here, he means eclipses. So here, again, it symbolizes a lack, something that's gone missing. And we start to see this grammatical figure in printed versions of plays in England in the late 16th and early 17th centuries. And it shows up there, instead of 3 little dots, it shows up there as 3 little dashes. It's called the eclipses. It shows up as 3 little dashes. Let me show you a couple of examples in King Lear. Maybe I'll just focus on the second one for our purposes. That should be enough. Where one character, Regan, is asking another character, Gloucester, wherefore to Dover? Wast thou not charged at peril? And then we get the 3 little dashes, the eclipses. She's about to continue to ask a second question. Her husband interrupts her and says, wherefore to Dover? Let him answer that first. So her words are gone. They're eclipsed. They are taken away by someone else there. As one scholar has observed, in a tragedy like King Lear, the punctuation of eclipsis makes forms of loss in the play textually present. So there's a lot of loss in King Lear. Loss of accord and tolerance between characters, loss of the whole self, finally in death, loss of eyes. Sorry, that's a spoiler alert, I guess, if you haven't read it. Someone loses their eyes in King Lear. There's a lot of loss, and the bottom line is we see the eclipses, this figure, quite a lot. And it resonates with the idea of the eclipse, which was viewed in the era as a loss, as an absence, as a darkness.
Thank you for listening to Eclipsing History.
This episode is based on the first 10 minutes of Dr. Gearhart's lecture in the BGSU Planetarium on April 4th, 2024. If you are interested in the whole presentation, you can access the whole talk at our website, bgsu.edu/eclipsinghistory.
Landon Cena composed the original music for the podcast. Ohio Humanities provided financial support. To access other episodes and additional content, go to bgsu.edu/eclipsinghistory.